President Trump says he's begun arranging a two-way peace meeting between Ukraine's Volodymr Zelenskyy and Russia's Vladimir Putin.
He adds that it will be followed by a three-way summit involving himself. And the announcement follows talks between Mr. Trump and Mr. Zelenskyy, and subsequently with European leaders who have traveled to Washington to provide the Ukrainian leader support. And the wider meeting focused on security guarantees for Kiev, which Mr. Trump said would be led by European countries and coordinated by the U.S.
The U.S. leader confirmed that Mr. Putin had agreed to accept protections for Ukraine during their summit in Alaska last Friday. And for more on what's been happening in Washington, let's speak now with Klaus Larre. He's Distinguished Professor of History and International Affairs at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Professor, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. I want to start by asking you about the overall atmosphere, the body language, at the White House compared to President Zelenskyy's last visit in February.
Yeah, good morning. It's great to be here. And the atmosphere was a lot better, much more friendly. There was fear among European leaders, and that was the reasons why they wanted to accompany him, that it might be another disastrous meeting between Zelenskyy and Trump. That was not the case. It was indeed quite constructive, quite friendly, a good meeting. And there were actually two meetings, the first one between Zelenskyy and Trump, and then the second one between all the 7 European leaders and Zelenskyy and Donald Trump as well. And even in the middle of that meeting, Trump went out of the room and telephoned Vladimir Putin for 40 minutes. And that is, of course, quite unusual, but it indicates that there was a constructive atmosphere, that something needed to be talked about.
Professor, Sir Trump claims that he's setting up a meeting between Mr. Zelenskyy and Putin and could be followed by a three-way dialogue involving himself. Given how entrenched both sides remain, do you see any chance of such meetings to produce meaningful progress?
Well, the information which has come out about that is actually quite confusing. There has been talk about a bilateral meeting between Putin and Zelenskyy, but there has also been information that refers to senior officials of both countries meeting somewhere, probably in a neutral location, and talking to each other, and not necessarily Putin and Zelenskyy in person. And I would say the latter is probably much more likely, because Putin and Zelenskyy meeting without a mediator, someone like Donald Trump or someone else, what could that meeting be like? That would be a shouting match, I would assume. So I think it is safe to assume that senior officials from both countries will meet first, and then we will have a trilateral meeting with Zelenskyy, Putin, and that will be mediated by Donald Trump.
Professor, I know we don't have a lot of details at this point, and we don't want to be getting ahead of ourselves. But this, meeting, this proposed meeting, both bilateral and then trilateral, seems to suggest, that Zelenskyy and the other European leaders who are present, kind of have agreed to some of the concessions, that were discussed by Presidents Trump and Putin at Alaska. Would that be your reading of the situation as well?
Yes, I think when the European leaders and Zelenskyy and Trump said today that they all want peace, I think they mean it. They know that the country, Ukraine, is exhausted. There have been many soldiers and civilians which have been killed. It has been a disastrous war. So the Ukrainians seem to be prepared to offer some sort of concessions, at least concessions for the time being, maybe not legally hammered out concessions, but they also want to get something in return. And that is security guarantees. They want to make sure if they do make concessions, if there is some sort of peace treaty arranged with Vladimir Putin, then that means that the war will not be able to start again in a year or 2 years' time or 5 years' time. So they want to have a permanent peace treaty, and they want to get security guarantees in return for perhaps making territorial concessions.
So, Professor, my understanding is that security guarantee was probably the most used words, apart from thank yous, at the meeting. I want to be clear what this actually means and how significant is it that President Trump has actually not explicitly ruled out direct involvement in providing this guarantee?
Yeah, here we still deal with a lot of uncertainty and confusion, to be honest, and I don't think that security guarantees have really been worked out in detail. It could mean a huge peacekeeping force, like 10,000 of soldiers from Western countries, from perhaps neutral countries, which were deployed on the border between Russia and Ukraine to maintain the peace. It could also mean a much smaller tripwire force, perhaps a few thousand soldiers from perhaps Western countries or neutral countries, and I think that has not been worked out at all. The big question is, will the United States participate in that in either way, big force or small force? Will there be American troops on the ground overseeing a peace arrangement between Putin and Zelenskyy? And I think that is a big question. And while Trump has indicated that he may be prepared to consider that, I don't think he has given any firm assurances that American troops on the ground will actually be part of such a security force. And also what is still puzzling is that Putin seems to have indicated that he might be happy with something like that and an Article 5 style guarantee for Ukraine. But the fear of some analysts is that it actually means that Putin wants to be part of that security guarantee and Russia wants to be part of these security forces on the ground. And that, of course, would defeat anything the Ukrainians would accept.
Professor, there's also been a split on the need for a ceasefire before a peace deal in Ukraine. And Mr. Trump says that a ceasefire is not needed at this point to negotiate ending the war because it might allow one side or the other to regroup or rebuild their forces. The leaders of France and Germany, even Ukraine, they want to see fighting stop first to create that stable environment for negotiations. How do you view this? Which sort of path is more likely to lead to a durable solution?
Well, in principle, I think Trump is right. You can negotiate a peace treaty while the fighting is still continuing. For example, today, while the meeting was taking place in the White House and also during the Alaska summit between Putin and Trump, the fighting continued and the killing continued in Ukraine. I think this morning before the meeting, there were 14 civilians being killed in Ukrainian cities because of Russian drone attacks. So it is quite possible to have that the fighting is going on while you talk peace. But that is, of course, not a very happy situation. And it is quite understandable that Ukraine wants to see an end of the fighting and the killing. And then, while that has been achieved, that then peace is being talked about. And the leaders of Germany, Merz and Macron, the French leader, they supported that desire by Zelenskyy. And Trump himself, only a few weeks ago, agreed or said that a ceasefire first would be desirable so that the fighting would stop and then you can focus on the negotiation of a peace treaty. But since meeting Putin on Friday in Alaska, he has changed his mind again and now keeps saying that a ceasefire is not essential, that a peace treaty can also be negotiated while the fighting continues. While this is true, it would be a very unhappy and also a volatile situation, which is not to be recommended.
All right, Professor, we do have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time and for your insights. Professor Klaus Larre from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill.